Okay, I had to take one more spin at this problem of acceleration versus distance and time for 0 to 60 acceleration, and I wanted to do this after I rushed through the last time. So let me look at it one more time. This is kind of a larger problem. It really does kind of bring out a lot of safety issues, and it's much more than just a concern with a 300cc bike. It's a concern with pretty much any motorcycle in any traffic condition where you have two vehicles which are, there's a good chance that they're going to share the same space. And you really kind of look at the whole issue involved and see it really does take more into consideration than whether or not a vehicle takes, 7 seconds to get to 60 miles an hour, whether it's a 300cc bike or 250 or a car or whatever. I mean, when cars are involved in a lot of these issues, certainly, but not just cars, but also motorcycles and bikes and bicycles and trucks and stuff. So it's really a much larger issue than just the one issue. So let's look at this a little bit more closely. I'll start off at first by looking at the raw calculations. So this is just using S equals 1/2 AT squared and V equals AT, basic physics, to calculate the distance required to accelerate from 0 miles an hour from standing still to 60 miles per hour at constant acceleration. We vary the acceleration. Here I have the chart in feet per second. If you look at the columns there to the left, and that is assuming it takes 1 second, and what is the required acceleration, and what's the required distance. If we keep going to increase the time, we can then calculate back out the acceleration and the distance required. And so we see that for the vehicles on the left side over there, the SV650, 3.3 seconds, 0 to 60 miles per hour. The R3, 5.1, a little faster than the Ninja 300. Maybe half a second faster. It's also joined in there with the Caprice 6-liter V8, which, if you know what the initials LEO mean, that might raise a hair in your neck a little bit. If not, you don't want to get too familiar with it. And also the Ninja 250, which is the precursor for the Ninja 300. I think that's about the same time for the GSX 250R, and in fact I may have pulled the data for the GSX 250R instead of the Ninja 250, but anyway, it's pretty close. Maybe I'll pop in a chart here of the source data so you can see that, just in case you really want to see it. Just fine. So I did in my other video, I included a lot of other data for a lot of the cars. The one I just got through about my Odyssey to Ducatis and BMWs out to Hudson Valley and back. So I'll put in one here for just the bikes, or at least the Ninjas in question. But the point is, it doesn't really matter that much. The real issue is that these slow bikes are not faster than most cars. They are faster than a lot of cars, true, but there are also a lot of cars that are as fast or comparably as fast. And in any case, it doesn't matter whether they're as fast flat out, because 9 times out of 10, you won't be riding the bike flat out or the car flat out. You will be riding it with modest acceleration, maybe half and maybe 3/4. You will not be drag racing somebody to get somewhere. And if you're drag racing somebody to merge or whatever, for the full 0 to 60 miles an hour, you're in a lot of trouble. You're probably not going to have that 4 seconds or 5 seconds to make that merge, and I'll get into why in about a minute. We'll get there. But first, let's start off. Let's assume that we're at 5 seconds. Okay, 5 seconds, we look at the chart on the right. We can go here, 5 seconds on the bottom. We look at the left, that's about 225 feet. Now, one of the critical things about 60 miles per hour, aside from the fact that a lot of highways have speed limits that are 55 miles an hour or 65 miles an hour, bracket it closely. But the thing about 60 miles per hour is it's easy to translate back into feet per second, and therefore into feet if you know how many seconds you have. So it's 60 miles an hour is about 88, 90 feet per second. it is 65 miles an hour is about 95, and I would say 70 is about 105. So you can check the math on this, but roughly speaking, 60 miles an hour is 90 feet per second, 70 miles per hour is 100 feet per second. So if you're talking about 100 feet at 70 miles an hour, it'll take you 1 second to traverse that. So when we see that we have 225 feet that it takes us to get to 0 to 60 miles per hour, you can imagine that it would take approximately 2.2 seconds for somebody traveling 70 miles per hour to cross that same distance. And this is where things start to become relatively hairy in terms of merging. We look at the 0 to 60 time and say, oh, it's fast because it can beat most cars. Well, the problem with most cars is that they're not trying to merge on a highway at 60 miles an hour with only 2 wheels and 400 pounds of weight and no protection of the rider. Motorcycles are. So it's the acceleration for bikes has to be given a sort of star, because it's much more important for a bike to be fast than it is for a car to be fast. A car driver can always say, hey, you can hit me if you want, but I'm still driving a car, and it's still going to damage your car and hurt you as much as it's going to hurt me and damage me. And they can, to a certain degree, chump out other traffic on the road by doing that, especially the larger trucks and SUVs and stuff, which is why there has been a trend towards larger vehicles over the past 20 so odd years since the price of gas dropped back down. So you can't play that game on a motorcycle. A motorcycle, you're basically left with avoiding the impact as your line of defense, or being really stupid and saying, I have the right of way, you should let me go first and not hit my motorcycle. And that kind of stupidity I'll get to later also. The self-righteous, indignant driver of a motorcycle who's lying in the street waiting for an EMT and planning on how he's going to get the money back for it in court. Assuming he survives the ride to the hospital, and assuming he survives the surgery, emergency surgery he has to go through to put together his body back together, whatever. Not to mention any possible mental injuries, resulting from the impact. He's looking at the recovery phase and the legal phase, not looking at the fact that he's lying in the street like an asshole. So there's a point here. We're going to get to the next one here. Let's go over it. This is 8 minutes already. Where we have to look at the real issue of merging. And merging is the space over here to the left where we talk about where the car and the truck, or the truck and the motorcycle, or the two motorcycles, or whatever, begin to try to occupy the same space and time. That's the problem. So I drew the basic problem out, which is you're at a dead stop in one lane, let's say the merge lane or whatever, and there's a vehicle coming up from behind, and you want to come out and pass over to that vehicle's lane, or pass that vehicle, or not get hit by that vehicle. The vehicle's doing a steady speed from the right side coming to the left, and you're going to accelerate from the center going to the left. How long does that car have to go to reach you if you're doing 0 to 60 miles an hour in, say, 5 seconds? Okay, well, assuming that the car is also doing 60 miles an hour, it's going to take roughly twice the distance to get to the same point that you will. Okay, at 88 feet per second, 90 feet per second, that car is going to take 500 feet to travel in 5 seconds. A little bit less, maybe 450, 500 feet to travel in 5 seconds. So if your motorcycle takes 5 seconds to accelerate from 0 to 60, and we've just looked at the chart, which shows that it takes 225 feet to do that, then your 225 feet will take you to the point over here to the left, and the car will join you in that 5 seconds if it's doing 60 miles an hour. So the thing is, for any vehicle at any speed, accelerating, whatever, there is always going to be a distance where if the vehicle trailing is doing the same speed that you want to achieve, that it has to travel twice as far to get there in the same time. Always. All right, so now, the classic problem, the classic dilemma for motorcyclists is not necessarily you merging onto the highway. It's someone pulling out in front of you while you're traveling down the road. It's the left lane, the left turner who pulls out and blocks you, right? And we know very well that for a lot of bikers, unfortunately, that the person pulling out is underestimated that distance required so badly that quite often the very spot where they pull out on the road is the point where that person gets killed, if they don't die soon after they fly over the top of the car and land on the highway. So that is an extreme case of them pulling out so late that they had no chance, the motorcyclist had no chance of slowing down or avoiding the vehicle, and had little option other than to hit the vehicle and hope for the best, okay? So the important thing is to realize is that that driver pulling out in front of traffic has to make a series of decisions and make them correctly for everything to work out well. The first thing is they have to estimate how fast the vehicle approaching is traveling and how far away they are at the same time, okay? They have to decide whether they can pull out successfully. And they have to decide when to pull out, and they have to do so based upon the first two factors: how far the vehicle is, how fast it's going, and at what time are they going to decide to make that pull-out decision. When, because that is just as important, because every second that ticks by, that driver is at 60 miles an hour, another 90 to 100 feet closer, and they have that much less distance to work with in terms of making a pullout. And what I suspect happens is a lot of people in this situation, a lot of drivers and a lot of motorcyclists make the same mistakes, which we get into in the next slide here. Okay, they make mental and physical errors. They improperly estimate how fast the vehicle is going. They improperly estimate how far away it is. They improperly estimate how much time it will take for them to get to the same speed. And for sure, they don't understand how much distance it takes. Most people have no idea how much distance it takes to go to accelerate their vehicle to a certain speed if you give them a random speed. If you give them a standard speed, they might have a clue. But that clue is a complicated clue because it often not only involves how long it takes their vehicle to accelerate, but also whether or not the driver involved will slow down to accommodate them. Okay? And that last decision is largely affected by how large the vehicle is that's approaching, how large their vehicle is that they're driving, and what the speed limit is on that section of road, and also what their personal driving experience is. And also their attitude. Whether or not they think the approaching driver is going too fast for conditions and should slow down and they should be able to pull out, and whether they should be an accident and whether they would be seen as at fault. A lot of times people just don't care if there may be an accident, and certainly they don't care as long as they aren't going to get hurt and they aren't going to be held responsible, okay? I think that in the motorcycle situation, you've got an extreme case where people just literally say blank. They just don't even think. They don't even realize. They think that when they see somebody, they can pull out at a certain distance at a certain speed, and they just don't they just refuse to consider anyone way outside of that range. And this is where I think that motorcyclists get in a lot of trouble. They blame the other rider, but the rider turns around right back and says, if you weren't going so fast, that wouldn't have happened. And this is where the driver lying in the street who's making plans to sue has made a fatal mistake in two cases. Number one, they got into the accident because they were overconfident and righteous, and second, they're going to lose a case legally also, because if they hadn't been going so fast on such a small vehicle, there is a reasonable expectation that the person who pulled out in front of them would not have done so. And in court, that is what matters. You can't always say that they have to always pull out in a way that's safe for the trailing vehicle. There's only a reasonable set of circumstances in which they can be expected to reasonably do it. And if you fall outside that set of circumstances, you're in trouble. Legally, they're going to be absolved of responsibility. So if not by a police officer, and if not by a judge, then certainly by a jury. And this is the issue. You've got to pass all these hurdles to win a case as a plaintiff. You can't just show up in court with a guy, and just bully him into winning the case. That's not going to happen. People are going to sympathize with the guy in this situation. What would happen if they were in that same situation? How would they feel? What would they expect? That's what they're going to think. So you can't just assume that just because you had the right of way, that because somebody pulled out in front of you, that they're going to be held responsible and not you. It's the same problem that Venus Williams is going through right now, that just because she ran a red light doesn't mean it's okay for the person who came through the green light to hit her. But at the same time, if the person who came through the green light didn't have a reasonable expectation that she was going to be popping out from the other side and had no time to avoid the collision, then she will be held responsible. And that's just all there is to it. There's some cut and dry circumstances here, in that if Joe Blow was in the same situation as you, would he want to be held responsible for it? No, probably not. If he was in the same situation as the other person, would he want you to be held responsible for it? He probably would. And you have to think about these things. These are the kind of things that happen in a court. So, also, the DA will say, well, we don't want people to think that they can do this sort of thing and get away with it. Yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance, it's an unfortunate situation, but at the same time, someone's going to be held accountable for it legally, and that's just how it is. So let's look at the next thing here. I've already talked to some degree about this, but we'll go over it a little bit more, because this part here is the really important part. Technical considerations: lack of knowledge and understanding of relevant physics. How many people who drive cars know how long it will take their vehicle to reach 60 miles an hour? How many people? I would say probably 1% of the people who drive know that. They might say, oh, it would take less than a mile or half a mile, okay? But you start getting into hundreds of yards or hundreds of feet, they have no clue, okay? 500 feet, they have no idea, okay? Say it does. For the car, it's a 7-second 0 to 60 car, not a 5-second 0 to 60 car. 300, 400, 500 feet become very possible, okay? And this is where, again, to some degree, we all rely on the person who's trailing us to slow down and accommodate the fact that we pulled out in front of us without having an issue or raising a stink about it, okay? The emotional issues are something you also assume in everyday driving, because people do pull out in front of other cars, and we don't have people getting into fights or getting shot about it all the time because people have good emotional control. That is an error in judgment to jump up in somebody's face over the fact that they pulled out in front of you when you could easily have slowed down and avoided a collision. Now, if they pull out in front of you and you have to struggle to avoid a collision, there's two issues involved. One, were you paying attention? And second, was it really going to be that hard for you to slow down? You will see in certain states like Virginia where the slightest possibility that somebody was startled and afraid that they may have had to panic brake or something will cause them to jump on their horn and make a big stink out of it. Sure, okay, but does that make it make sense? I say no. I say it doesn't make sense for you to go up behind somebody honking your horn at them for something that happened 10 seconds ago while you're driving in traffic. It's ridiculous, but that's what happens in Virginia, and that's how it is. And that's an environmental issue. In some places, these things are big issues, and in other places, they are not. It depends on where you are, what you're doing, the road conditions, the weather, time of day, blah, 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 all this kind of thing. It's completely, subjective in a lot of ways, and the objective issues of 0 to 60 time are almost lost in the fog of subjectivity. Assuming you're not in Texas about to get shot for what happened, and assuming you're not in Virginia with someone honking in your ear like an idiot without happening, we break it down into 4 cases, and let's be objective about it. First is, 1, you have plenty of distance, there's no real threat of impact. The car was far enough away, going slow enough, and you're accelerating fast enough where there's no real problem, okay? Second is that the accident was avoidable if the trailing vehicle slows down enough soon enough, okay? If they're paying attention, if they slow down at a reasonably achievable, safe, and somewhat modest amount, their accident is easily avoided, okay? That's what I would call condition B. Now, condition C is where they have to panic brake, where they're not paying attention, where they don't expect you to come out because people don't do that here, that kind of shit, and they just refuse to, slow down a little bit because they got a hair up their butt. Okay, that's condition C, where you're getting into a sort of a gray area there. Condition D is where if they slam on their brakes, they can slow down enough to avoid you. Okay, I think just about anybody would be, upset by that if it happens to them. And then we start getting into that condition E where people go, fuck it, I don't care if the guy is going to get hit. I'm going to hit him anyway because he shouldn't have pulled out in front of me like that. And believe me, you'll get people like that too. You'll get people who will wait beyond the last second and run into you slightly. Or if they do run into you, they'll say, hey, it's your fault. You shouldn't have pulled out in front of me, because they want to teach you a lesson. And that's the thing. You're going to get guys like that. You're going to get people like that. And that's not even considering the cars where they have bad brakes or the guys, smoking a cigarette or talking to a friend of his on drugs or something like that. The road's wet, the road's got gravel on it, oil, whatever. And it's just not, or it's downhill, it's just not conducive to doing that. And he can't slow down. Okay. Third case is that the trailing driver can't avoid hitting you, even if it is doing his very best, even if everything's, favoring the situation, can't avoid you, but at least he could slow down, okay? And he can slow down, or he can, pull off to the side, or you can pull off to the side, or whatever. He might pass you, okay, but that doesn't mean he has to hit you. And there's a big difference between those two things. Just as you're pulling into a red light, you may stop late and not have stopped behind the car ahead of you, but that doesn't mean you have to run into that car. Any sensible motorcyclist should know that if they're worried about being able to stop on time, you aim off to the left or to the right to miss the vehicle. So if you're a foot long, you don't run into the back of the car. Same kind of thing happens with a car. Just because you don't have enough room to not stop before you hit to this person doesn't mean you actually hit them. You can pull off slightly. You can pass them on the left or something. 9 times out of 10, there's no reason for you to go slamming into a car just because you can't stop in time to avoid hitting it from behind, okay? Then we get to case 4. There is nothing that can be done. There's no time for avoiding. The person panics. There's no time to stop. Nothing can really happen. All that can happen is you're going to hit the car, period. Boom. And that happens all the time. People just follow too close, going too fast. Next thing you know, boom, they've hit somebody. There's nothing they can do about it because they've given away all their options by following too close, just as a motorcyclist can give away his options by pulling out too late or by waiting too long, assuming that the car pulling out in front of them is not going to pull out. If you don't take that possibility into consideration and slow down, you can be on the other side of that foot, and believe me, it's going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt the guy whose car you hit, okay? You have to take into consideration the fact that the vehicle may pull out in front of you. Just because you have the right-of-way does not mean that you assume that you'll be given the right-of-way by the other driver. There's a big difference. So that's what I think is a lot of the problems that we run into as motorcyclists who have an ego issue or are self-righteous or just not, aware on a number of levels, just not using their heads and being careful and avoiding, as I say in the next issue, avoiding the accident, even if they weren't responsible for it. Avoid it. Don't get into an accident out of spite or out of stubbornness. Avoid the accident. Don't be the idiot who gets into an accident out of self-righteousness. Okay? For a motorcyclist, it reduces to 2 cases. You avoided the accident or you didn't. One of the two. That's simple. Okay? You can argue that you weren't at fault. Your estate can come to court and argue for damages. You're still dead. Okay? You're still the one in the hospital. You're still dead. Where does this become something that people want to have happen rather than not getting into an accident? And that, I think, is a much more complex issue, but it gets into the psychology of the problem. People refusing to accept responsibility for their own health and safety, and people refusing to accept the need to back off, to concede the issue. Okay? People who refuse to accept some basic things in life. It's better to avoid an accident than to have to recover from one. It's better to reject bad options whenever you can in favor of good options. Even when you don't think you have another option, it's still better to reject that bad option and keep looking for a better option. Don't accept it just because you think you have no choice. Find another option. This is a major issue that a lot of people simply can't take and think about. Third, don't go all in on a promise. Don't commit your life to somebody else's word. This is a capitalist society. We live in a society of people who love to make false promises, or promises they're not going to back up in exchange for profit or to avoid financial responsibility. Okay? Do not throw your life away on somebody else's word. Okay? Don't get egotistical and throw your nose in front of a train trying to prove that you're a badass, or trying to prove that you're not a pussy, trying to prove that you're not a coward, thinking that you can recover from the injury later. Okay? That logic will definitely get you killed on a motorcycle. There's no question. If anything is going to get you killed, it's trying to prove how much of a badass you are on a motorcycle. Okay? Plead the fifth, walk away, come back another day when you don't have to worry about it. Or wait 10 seconds, let the problem go in front of you. There's a reason why people are gentlemen. The whole concept of being a gentleman evolved. It's so people can just basically avoid the conflict in the first place. Step back, let the other party win for a change. Okay? Whatever. It's better that you survive and ride another day than you kill yourself trying to prove that you're a badass on a motorcycle. Okay? And last but not least, a very important thing in life in general, especially when riding a motorcycle, be honest with yourself about what's going on. Okay? Don't bullshit yourself about what you're doing. Don't bullshit your friends, your family, because they're not going to buy into that bullshit. They're going to look at you, and rightfully so, like you're an idiot. Be honest about what you are doing before you do it, and before it turns into a catastrophe. Before there's a calamity, before the damage is done, while you still have a chance to back out and ride another day. Okay? I thought that was worth another 40-minute video, and I hope that you find in there something which makes it worthwhile for you also.